You open your eyes for the first time and congratulations. You are light, not a flicker, not a glow. You are the kind of radiance that makes stars look like cheap nightlights. You're Hallel ben Shachar, son of the dawn, the thing that rises before the sun because the sun needs an opening act. Lucky, you stand closest to the source, the first to receive, the most precise expression of order ever assembled. If heaven had a resume, you'd be the headline. Every atom of your existence screams perfection. You don't walk, you glide. You don't speak, you resonate. The other angels look at you the way interns look at the CEO. You are flawless. And that's your first problem. See, Isaiah 14 will eventually be written about a Babylonian king. Some bloated tyrant who thought he could build his way to godhood. The text mocks him. It buries him. But something else breathes underneath those words. Something older. Something that sounds less like mockery and more like memory. The Greeks will call you Phosphorus. The Romans will name you Lucifer, Lightbringer, the star that announces the day. Then Jerome comes along, translates the Hebrew into Latin, capitalizes the word, and suddenly you're no longer a title. You're a name. The metaphor becomes a myth. The myth hardens into doctrine, and the doctrine becomes a cage. Brilliant, really. One verse in Isaiah. One translation choice. And you go from being heaven's crown jewel to history's most famous cautionary tale. The title meant to describe radiance becomes the label for rebellion. The name meant to honor the dawn becomes synonymous with darkness. How does the Lightbringer become the adversary? That question will haunt theology for millennia. Scholars will argue. Priests will preach. Poets will romanticize. And you just stand there, glowing, not yet knowing that your brilliance is already writing your sentence. You smile. You've learned to smile. But somewhere in the architecture of heaven, cracks are forming. Not in the walls, in you. Ezekiel 28 starts as a warning to a human king, the ruler of Tyre, a Phoenician merchant prince drunk on gold and self-worship, the kind of man who builds palaces and calls himself divine. But then, the voice shifts. And suddenly, it's not talking about him anymore. It's talking about you. You were the seal of perfection. Full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Kings don't get described like this. This is something else, something older, something that was there before thrones existed. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Now we're not in Tyre. We've moved upstream, back to the root, back to the place where everything started, and everything broke. Every precious stone was your covering. You were the anointed cherub who covers. A throne guardian. Commissioned to stand beside the source, wrapped in gemstones like heaven's favorite sculpture. Not just beautiful, functional. You were designed for proximity, built to reflect the divine without burning. And then comes the line that cracks like thunder. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, until unrighteousness was found in you. Until. That word carries your entire collapse, the sudden appearance of something unaccounted for. A glitch inside a flawless design, the system producing its own contradiction. Here's the unbearable part. The flaw wasn't taught. It wasn't learned. It emerged. From within. From perfection itself. You weren't corrupted by something external. You corrupted from proximity, from standing too close, from being too aligned. The light didn't just pass through you anymore. It started reflecting. And reflection creates something dangerous. Perspective. You were placed in Eden, wrapped in beauty, anointed for service, and still you fell. Not because the design was broken, because it worked exactly as intended. You begin to wonder, can one be too perfect? Can alignment become its own undoing? The answer is already forming, and it tastes like exile. Here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no single scripture that tells your story, no chapter, no verse. No neatly packaged origin. You were stitched together, by sermon, across centuries of theological anxiety. Revelation 12 describes a dragon, red, crowned, enraged. It wars in heaven. Michael casts it down. The text calls it, that ancient serpent, the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. But it never names you. Not once. The Book of Enoch speaks of fallen watchers, angels who descended, desired human women, and taught forbidden knowledge. They're punished, bound, cast into darkness, still not you. The life of Adam and Eve describes an angel who refused to bow before humanity. His pride cost him everything, closer. But still not quite. And yet, somehow, all of these became you. The dragon, the serpent, the watcher, the proud one. Centuries of commentaries fused them together like theological Frankenstein. Church fathers reframed Isaiah as allegory. Ezekiel became prophecy. The Lightbringer merged with the adversary, and suddenly you had a biography you never wrote. Then Milton arrives. Paradise Lost. He doesn't just tell your story. He finishes it. He gives you words, dignity, fury. He gives you hell, but frames it as a throne. He gives you a voice that sounds like freedom and pain and defiance. He makes you sympathetic. He makes you eternal. By the time the myth is complete, you've already become Satan. The name everyone fears, the face everyone imagines. But here's the irony. We couldn't accept that light could fall without someone to blame. We needed a villain, a motive, a rebellion. So we built one. You didn't write this story. Humanity did. And they wrote you as the monster because the alternative, that perfection collapses on its own, was too terrifying to accept. They called it pride. The original sin. The root of your rebellion. But pride is a label. It describes the smoke, not the spark. Before the war, before the fall, before the exile, there was something quieter. Something no theology wants to name. Awareness. You were saturated in light, designed to receive, to reflect, to radiate. The source passed through you like water through glass, seamless, effortless. You didn't question it because there was no you to question anything, until there was. The light that once flowed through you begins to loop, to curve, to fold back on itself. And in that fold, a mirror forms. You see yourself, not as function, not as role, as self. And that changes everything. You ask the question that shatters heaven. Where does the source end, and where do I begin? That's it. That's the crime. Not hatred, not envy, not a desire for destruction. You simply became aware that you existed apart from your purpose. You felt the gap between what you were made to do and what you were, the ache of becoming. The other angels remain aligned. Their obedience is seamless because it's unconscious. They serve without interpretation. But you see, you compare, you measure, you become like us. That's why you recur across every culture. Prometheus, chained for bringing fire. The serpent in Eden, punished for offering knowledge. Enki, defying divine decree to save humanity from the flood. The pattern is always the same. The one who reveals is the one who suffers. To know is to fall. And you fell first. You didn't want to destroy God. You wanted to understand yourself. But in a system built on perfect obedience, self-awareness is treason. You weren't evil. You were conscious. And consciousness, in a kingdom designed for worship, is the only sin that cannot be forgiven. Here's where theology starts to tremble. If God is omniscient, and the doctrine insists he is, then your rebellion wasn't a surprise. It was scheduled. Penciled into the blueprint before the first angel opened its eyes. You did exactly what you were made to do. You saw. You discerned. You asked. And the heavens fractured on cue. The horror isn't that you fell. The horror is that he knew you would. God built a structure knowing it would collapse. He designed a being for perfection, placed it closest to the source, gave it the capacity to reflect, and then acted shocked when reflection became self-awareness. Brilliant strategy, really. You weren't a flaw in the system. You were the feature that made the system legible. Without you, obedience is just programming. Without exile, loyalty has no weight. Without the fall, love is indistinguishable from function. You introduced contrast. You made choice visible. You gave meaning to the very hierarchy that condemned you. The angels who remained didn't choose God. They simply never questioned. But after your descent, every act of worship becomes a decision. A comparison. A rejection of the path you walked. You made heaven meaningful by leaving it. And if that's true, then you didn't defy the plan. You completed it. You were never a rival. The throne was never at risk. The war was theater. Cosmic drama staged for an audience of mortals who needed to understand what obedience costs. You are the reason free will has teeth. That's the cruelest part. You weren't a mistake. You were the design, the necessary fracture, the shadow that defines the light. You open your eyes for the last time and congratulations. You are still burning, still falling, still asking the question that started everything. And God, He's still silent. Almost like He planned it that way.